It is heavy things lightly. It's John. It's first things. And today, New York Times, literally number one best-selling author, Gregg Hurwitz. He's written like 24 books in the Orphan X series, which first of all, we talk about how do you even do that? He was preternatural. He was a writer from the beginning, and he talks about the notion of art, the technocratic mind, gorging, like eating too many pheasants. That's a thing. As a metaphor about society. We get into democracy and being a Democrat. That's interesting. Gregg Hurwitz recently just did the Gospel series, the New Testament series with Jonathan Pageau, Jordan Peterson, a whole bunch of folks. This is a great talk. I'm glad to have been able to talk with Gregg, and I'm glad to be able to invite you to the Art of Tamada. That's our First Things Foundation fundraiser. There's 2 of them this year in July, 7, 8, 9, 10 at Leavenworth Sleeping Lady Resort. Guys, come on. Like, the only reason you go is you don't have the money, and then you should still call me. I'll probably find a way to give you the money. I feel like everyone should go, but then it wouldn't be a fundraiser. It would be a fun drainer. Okay, whatever. There's also one in Isla Morada. That's right, Isla Morada in Florida, in the Keys, like we did last year. That's Jordan Hall speaking there, and a guest speaker yet to be known. Out in Washington, it's Vesper Stamper and Richard Rowland, he of Universal History. Guys, come. We need your assistance and support, but you kind of need a good weekend. Don't even lie. Chilling with the brothers and sisters. This is Heavy Things Lightly, or Talk with Gregg Hurwitz. Peace out. Guys, it's Gregg Hurwitz. Am I saying that right? I don't want to sound like an idiot.
No, you got it. You got it right. Yeah.
So you're on this thing, Heavy Things Lightly, and people are going to know you when you pop on from your great conversations with Jonathan, who a lot of people, we have a lot of crossover there. As we were talking about off air, I hosted the Symbolic World, tried to make it a little lighter. They did the heavy stuff. I tried to do the light stuff. I did some stand up, and now I've been able to run into you. So, you know, I'm an author in my own right, and I love writers. I love how you guys think. So just how did it happen that you started to write? Like, what's that about?
It's so funny. I've been thinking about this again. I had an amazing conversation with Pageau, who now and then will just say something that's stupendous, around more often than once in a while around symbolism. And I said, where do you get that, man? And he's like, I just get these gifts. Like there's these gifts from God where like he'll see something in the symbology and it just comes to him. It's very interesting. So I started to think about that in terms of my writing. The only thing I ever wanted to do is write. I mean, I think in stories, when people say, where do you get your ideas? I always go, I don't know. Where do you get your ideas? It's just the way I think. And more, I've been thinking about it. Like if I'm writing the next day, if I'm this morning, I get these like gifts. It's like, it's dialogue, it's scenes, it's the whole way my brain worked. I used to go to bed and sleep with a dictionary when I was in 3rd, 4th grade. Really? I wrote my first short story, Mysteries, when I was in 5th grade. I illustrated them with crayons. Started my first novel. I was 19. I was an undergrad. I was, young and dumb enough still to just think if you wrote a good book, it could get published. The arrogance of youth. I had a ton of luck early. I sold it basically right out of college. I did a kind of stall year at grad school. I won a fellowship to go study Shakespearean tragedy because I figured that's the most useful degree. If I needed a backup career, they'd come kicking down my door to hire, somebody with a master's in Shakespearean tragedy if my novelist career didn't work out. I mean, but I was on the scene. It's all I ever wanted to do. And I had luck early, and I've been writing full time pretty much my whole life. It's just been an unbelievable blessing with a lot of luck along the way. I don't deny that hard work plays a role, but you know very well, you need doors to open. You need people to open those doors. And I've just been very fortunate. So I've had, 24 novels out now. I wrote comics. I wrote Batman, Wolverine. I've had a couple movies made, some TV. And it's been great. It's been a wonderful ride.
You let me right into a question I wanted to ask you. How long, guys, Orphan X, that's your fundamental, that's your longest series, right? That's the
9th one just came out. It's called.
So how long can a writer stay in one series before you can't go any longer.
I'll tell you, I just did a panel. Yesterday was the LA Times Festival of Books. We just did a panel on this topic. There's some people, John Sanford's getting better and better. Like some people, the series starts to fade. Wow. Part of what's very different with the Orphan X series, and I think your readers in particular are going to notice, there's a lot of thematic and characterological shifts that are happening that are markedly different than what happens in most series. And so, look, the premise is relatively simple. Young kid taken out of a foster home at the age of 12. He's trained offline to be an assassin, to go where the U.S. government can't go, to kill people in violation of international law. And if he's ever caught or tortured to pieces, no one cares and he doesn't know enough to be in trouble. And so one of the big revelations that I had when I was sort of terrified to start the series, and I kept putting it off and writing another book first, was what if his handler and father figure actually loved him, just loved this kid. And he takes him out of this broke ass foster home in East Baltimore, trains him in, mixed martial arts, drown proofing, psyops, foreign etiquette, language, military history. He turns him into kind of a blue collar Renaissance man. Or I use the quote from the OSS that predated the CIA. They said their ideal recruit is a PhD who could win a bar fight. So he's educated, but it's grounded. And one of the things his father figure tells him is the hard part's not making you a killer. The hard part is keeping you human. And it's a series about somebody who is discovering what it means to be human. I think of it in some ways, looking back, that at the opening of Orphan X, it's almost like he realizes he's this archetypal thriller hero. He's Pinocchio, but he wants to be a real boy. And as he learns his humanity, as he starts to learn how to speak, which he was never taught. I say he's learning to speak the strange language of intimacy. As he becomes more human, he sees those around him as more human. And then his targets. So he's left the program now and he has an encrypted 1-855 to nowhere phone number, which you can call and someone answers in the real world. And he helps people who are in desperate need with no return.
That's very cool.
But as the series progresses, as he gets more human, the type of book changes quite drastically. It becomes much more about morality. There's a lot of spiritual themes that start to run through it. That's and so for me with the series, I'm more excited to having this 9th book come out and the 10th book I'm working on than I was writing books 2 and 3. It's been unbelievable to write a series where the main character is transforming and then he transforms the characters and world around him. And then I'm writing a completely different kind of thriller.
So one of the things, like Pajot, I'm an Orthodox guy. There's this idea that you progress through something like you purification, illumination, theosis, and it's a pattern that we adhere to. And theosis looks like becoming like God. Now, not God, but becoming like God, or it's a total awakening, and it's a union. And I wonder if the asceticism of writing. Do you think what's happening to your character because of your writing is something like being mirrored in you? Are you growing in the same way that this character is starting to be like, whoa, I'm waking up to the idea of intimacy and to being a real human? Is it happening to you?
There's no question. I think it always is in the arts. I think it always was, but I never knew till after. I'd write a whole book and look back at it 2 months after I was done and go, oh, that was about my terror of the vulnerability to becoming a parent. What's happened with Orphan X that's wild, John, that I feel like I'm holding onto a bull I can barely keep hold of, is I know it's happening as I'm writing it. I'm working. Joan Didion has a great quotation. She says, I write so I know what I think.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's like I've caught up to it where the things I'm contending with, my, intrusions or excavations or, interventions in the political and cultural world are starting to mirror what I'm working on. Everything becomes fractal, which you Orthodox types know better than anybody. Mm-hmm. It's what's going on. What I'm dealing with my wife and my daughter in communication is what I'm working on in the books. The realizations I'm figuring out about the political landscape is opening up what the ethical dilemmas are in the books. Mm-hmm. I'm writing about these themes about, conscience versus like AI, digital drone warfare, algorithmic conscience. I'm like all the themes that are starting to take place are around suffering and meaning. It's unbelievable. I started the first Orphan X book when I was on the cusp of 40, and I don't think it's any coincidence. I think I was right at the point of
Yeah.
letting go of the set of rules, the story that had governed
Yeah.
what I hope is the first half of my life, if I don't get hit by a falling Acme safe or baby grand piano. And
Acme safe.
you know,
Right on.
and how do I reconstitute a new set of rules? Well, that's what Evan Smoke is doing. My character Orphan X,
Mm-hmm.
he has the 10 commandments. He was given the 10 assassins commandments, and it's not a coincidence that I call them the commandments. And the first book, he breaks every single one of them, and he's trying to shatter into a new understanding of how to exist in the world. And it's precisely what I was doing in my 40s. And we're like in lockstep. I'm writing stuff that I'm figuring out from him, right? I'm researching things that are giving me awareness to put into the writing. Stuff's happening on the page. And I don't mean to talk preciously or mystically about like beckoning the muse, but it's a very weird process of expansion for me. And, the themes, the sixth book is called Prodigal Son. There's a lot of um, spiritual,
Yeah.
examining different methods of meaning making. And then I have these extraordinary situations. Like I went off and did the Exodus seminar for Daily Wire with, some pretty spectacular religious thinkers. I'm from a different sort of background, though I'm wide open with enormous respect for religious communities as a result of how much they've given me in my life. And that changed a lot of the ways I was viewing
Something.
the world.
It's being called. You're being called to some awakening, bro.
Yeah.
You're being called in the same way we're all being called every day. I think writing is a type of way in to an awakening, but I hear it in your words that like what's happening. I feel like a lot of people on the internet are like, what's happening? So the internet's doing two things. It's asking really hard questions of how we use our time, but it's also allowing us to meet things we would never meet without it. And it's forming. I think it's allowing us to have a kind of a renaissance of we'll say religion. I don't really like that word, but a renaissance of the spiritual world.
Spirituality. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's happening is we're seeing more and more the secular, I'm just going to call it the symbolic world, meaning spiritual, religious, mythological, storytelling world, to just throw a net over all of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a total unhooking of the secular world and the symbolic world. And I think that part of that is we're just enthralled to these unconscious projections everywhere right now because the two parts aren't talking to each other. And the changes that are coming with artificial intelligence, with the role that social media is playing in our lives, the way that our phones are eating our brains, the way that we're subject to like deep machine algorithmic learning, the surges of ideology, the purely secular brain is not equipped to contend with the complex change before us. It's just simply not. We can't just go in and order all the facts in the right way. And, it's one of the key themes in Exodus was, and Dennis Prager said this quite beautifully. It's about the law wrapped in the sacred. If it's not wrapped in the sacred, what you have is what we're seeing. It's like overgrown human resource departments setting like endless complex rules that no one can ever catch up with. There has to be some parameter which contains and beckons and is in conversation with what the law is. And that's a hierarchy of values. It's subsidiary value sets. No one talks about that. I'm sure you could talk about that much more eloquently than I can as Orthodox. Part of my friendship with Jonathan has really opened up. I mentioned to you briefly before the call, I'm from a secular Jewish, longtime atheist background, though I myself am not an atheist and have not been for some time. But my parents sent me to a Jesuit high school. And the Jesuits, man, they can educate. And the first thing they did was say, first year, we're sitting down, you're reading the Old Testament. You won't understand anything in the culture. Old Testament first year, New Testament second year, Christian morality third year. And by the way, here's the arts and here's literature and here's Dostoevsky and here's Dante. And it was just extraordinary. And so for me, with the openness that I have, the gifts that I've been shown, through different communities in the Christian world are just unbelievable. And there's something in Orthodoxy that I'm very drawn to. I mean, I have a lot of close friends who are evangelical, and that kind of beaming goodwill from evangelicals is something that's so wonderful. But with
I like
Orthodox,
that. I like that characterization.
yeah, it's
It
like,
makes sense.
Oz Guinness was in the Exodus. He just like beams evangelical goodwill. He's just this like shining soul, right?
Yeah,
When you meet
yeah,
him.
yeah.
But with Orthodoxy, there's such amazing like complexity and nuance, and there's a darkness that's balanced. It's been incredible, having so much overlap with Jonathan in so many ways.
But your writing's rich like that. So but
Thank you.
it's attractive. You know what I mean? In the sense that I think my phone just went off. No, stop it, phone. My phone is talking to me. By the way,
All
that's my
right.
question I
Or
want
it's
to ask you
listening to
right now.
you.
Or
That's
it's
what it's doing.
listening to me.
Yeah.
That's my question I want to ask right now. But well, let me ask it. You talked about your character Evan Smoke. So, man, I had this idea as you were saying this. It sounds like someone got a hold of him. We'll say they had murder on their mind, or they had the CIA, or they had the notion that I'm going to create something that's necessary for us. And then the character, Evan Smoke, wakes up to his humanity. Here's what I think. I think right now, algorithms and the internet, or whatever you want to call this worldview, this technocratic worldview, is akin to that institutionalization of these young men who then have to wake up to a humanity. The algorithms are terrifying to me. They're they're the thing that is making our young men and women too something like tools of something else. And I
It's
wonder what you think
descendants
about
of
that.
Tubal Cain building the Tower of Babel.
That's right. That's interesting,
You know,
man. And so what do we do? How does your character get loose in the end? And I wonder, you don't have to give it away, but I wonder how young people get loose. Do they
well,
have to
part of
put the
what he
phone
is, I
down?
mean, one of his, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, one of his code names is the Nowhere Man. He's got no imprint. He's got no digital footprint. And so part of it is that he's not plugged into right now. Part of what we're seeing is people, especially young people, are so overpowered online that it's just staggering. You have people, these kids, young boys, girls, they don't even have fully grown in prefrontal cortexes yet. The prefrontal cortex isn't even myelinated. They're up against corporations employing teams of addiction specialists backed by deep machine algorithmic learning to target them for maximum stickiness on an app. So is that outrage, insecurity, longing, lust? We're units. We've turned our kids into these sort of consumer units. They're a future voting block. They're a buying block. I have a friend who said, anytime you're online and you feel something, someone's making money. And I think the solution very much is twofold. I mean, one is in ritual that is not online. I mean, part of it can be online. It's ritual, which you guys know something about. And the other thing is relational, the local and relational. And then we need to do with technology is great. I mean, AI can be wonderful. It's got to be in its proper place. It's got to be like, to use a Fantasia reference, we want to be Sorcerer Mickey. We don't want to be the eyeless mops hauling buckets of water around. Like, we need to be in charge of technology, not vice versa. And the tools are so powerful that it's subverting it. And look, that subversion we're seeing everywhere. I mean, I'm increasingly convinced that look, it's hardly a unique observation to say that like roaring leftist ideology is a religion. These things have to go somewhere. If you don't understand a notion of original sin, let's say, original sin, what's great with original sin is and one thing I love so much about Christianity is that there's sort of a twofold process to keep you from just getting swallowed up by unconscious projection. One is original sin. You're never going to be perfect, no matter what. Sorry. No one ever has been in the history of the world. And two, somebody else died for the sins that you yourself are necessarily going to commit. And that notion that you're striving after something that is a perfect ideal that you can never reach, you have to submit to something that you can never reach, but that you should nonetheless aspire for, is what keeps you out of anxiety, depression, OCD looping, shame,
you
guilt.
are speaking it right now.
And Well, and I think that in some ways, if you ignore those things, they just shove underground and then they
That's
pop
right.
out in all these weird ways where it's like, well, original sin, let's say mommy, mother nature's mad at us. Like nature's higher than man now. We're going to worship the gods of nature instead. And so that means that,
Yep.
we can't use straws because they'll choke a turtle, and we can't do this, and everything's broken down. All
Mhm.
these ways that are, and look, I'm all for stewardship, responsible stewardship of the environment. But again, it's like, if only we had a template for how that was, for how we need to name nature and interact with it. But it's for me, it's all about when these values get out of control and they float up. It's like, Douglas Murray said at one point in a speech about man and nature and kind of global, out of control globalism. He said, man isn't the problem, we're the point. And so it's like, can we take steps to steward our environment better? Of course. Should we be
Yes.
worshiping nature and then not having kids and discouraging people in this way that's very anti-life? And so I think that the principles that are intact in, let's call it for now, a Hellenic, Jewish, Judeo-Christian ethic that undergirds the Western world, have the templates for us not to just continuously spin after some ideal that we're supposed to be nonstop perfect. And then we're shoving these projections into other aspects of the world, whether it's towers of Babel that we're building technologically or elevating nature to some place where
Mhm.
it's the furious devouring mother, and we can't kind of keep control of it. We need a language that is a symbolic narrative based language. And as we return to these foundational stories, guess what? There's some pretty good ones we have at hand within the culture of the West.
Let me ask you a hard question on that. I don't know if it's hard. It might make us seem like weirdos, and this really challenges. You were talking to Jordan Peterson, and I know that you guys have a nice history together. But and he's interesting. I'm not saying you're the same person, but you've had a chance to speak with him, and this conversation comes up all the time in my head as I live in this world that I live in at First Things and doing our work. So let me premise it with one thing. We kind of do like Orthodox Christian Peace Corps. So we're around the world and we send people for 2 years at a time, and they live in communities that don't tell as their origin narrative. They don't tell the evolutionary story. So we work in Sierra Leone and in Mozambique. The people there, I'm talking about the common people, they don't know themselves as the outcome of evolution. So their anthropology is not naturally scientific or evolutionary. The Georgians are the same way, Guatemalan, Mayan, the same way. And what I've noticed is I don't think we take seriously enough, 150 years of telling a narrative about sludge as our mother. Like, I don't think we take seriously enough how powerful narrative is toward leading us toward truth, and the stories we tell matter. And we keep telling a story. Jordan's the worst at it, in my opinion, that in other words, he cites evolutionary evidence constantly as ways to understand our being in the present. It drives me nuts because it could be that evolutionary narrative is actually the thing that's killing us. So this isn't to say that the world's 6,000 years old. I'm not saying that. But what do you think of the evolution narrative as a way to understand who we are? I think it's dangerous. What do you think?
Again, I think, look, I'm a huge proponent of a liberal arts education. I think it's the greatest American invention aside from jazz or bourbon. I think it's just extraordinary.
Right on for jazz. I love it.
Yeah.
I like mezcal myself. It's my favorite.
Mezcal's pretty wonderful, especially with a little crushed worm salt and a slice of orange.
Ooh,
but
get it.
And so part of it is, again, for me, part of what a liberal arts education is that everything is held that we're occupying different spaces and disciplines, and most importantly, different ethics. So if I'm in a lab in college, I'm thinking like a scientist. If I'm in a history class, I'm thinking like a historian, right? If I'm in a theology class, I'm trying to think like a theologian. And part of what we've had is this total deterioration of an ability to occupy different mindsets. And so one of the things that starts to change is if I say, oh, well, I'm Jewish, so I'm a Jew in a theology class. I'm a Jew in a science class. I have anxiety. My anxiety is primary in lab. And it's not to say that people don't have mental difficulties that they need help for, but what should be a safe space is not a college classroom. It's your time with your family or with your priest or your rabbi or your psychologist. That's your safe space. You should submit to different forms of thinking. I think the biggest problem we've gotten into is that the secular world, to some extent, has detached itself completely from theological thinking. If you look at Harvard, my alma mater, I went there when it was still vaguely something to be proud of, I like to think. I mean, now it's a disaster. But, it started as a seminary. And one of the things that religion does that is unique in religion is that it puts everything in a culture in its proper place. Yeah. It's a means, like Exodus is about how are things distributed horizontally across the tribes and vertically up Mount Sinai. How do we establish something in a way that has meaning and carries us forward? Then within that, it's not a big threat if you're in science class thinking like a scientist and you're talking about the evolutionary process, which is quite captivating. But when that becomes everything and theology is denigrated, then it becomes very complicated. And so I do think that we have lost the ability, in some ways, theology or foundational thinking or what mythology was, right? Or like for the Hellenists, it was their panoply of the gods or their it was something that ordered and gave rise to then science and math and all these other forms. And I think what's happening is we've narrowed them out and we've given rise to the individual identity within each discipline that's more important than the discipline. Our lawyers don't act like lawyers. Our Supreme Court justices don't act like Supreme Court justices. Our students aren't acting like students, where they're humble and learning from people who have experts. Everyone's acting like them, that the personal, partisan, ideological pattern of their whole heart should be reflected everywhere in the culture, in their party, in the political system, like 350 individuals. And there's not a shared story that exists under. And so I think that what's missing a lot is humility and knowing one's place. And, a big part of me going to Exodus as somebody who's like of and from, in some ways, the secular world, though, I'm very open and have had a lot of experiences that differentiate me from that and from my background, was also me knowing my place at that table, which is like, what am I listening? What am I here to learn? What are the different viewpoints? How do they integrate with mine? Where are the bridges? How are we going to connect this? How can we connect it in this time of polarization? And where's the meaning that we can share to move forward? It's not about being right or winning. It's certainly not about elevating the idiosyncratic pattern of my own soul as being the fractal basis from which I want education and politics in the country and the global order to derive. It's insanity.
That's right. I wonder, the Enlightenment project, which is not synonymous with science. I think science and the Enlightenment are not the same thing. Science is, a method. And the Enlightenment, I think, is a very religious movement. I wonder if they saw what you just described was this categorization sort of habituation, where I do it naturally. I was taught to do it in school, is to categorize in a way and imagine each category has its own reality. But we're an integrated creature where nobody's ever just doing science. It's a weird concept, actually, to imagine that if I just perfect the doing of science, then somehow life will get better. I wonder, do you throw out like, I kind of tend to, the podcast focuses on old world and new world, the life, before the Enlightenment, life after the Enlightenment, and how we've lost certain lessons that are fundamental to health. That's kind of what we do on this pod, back and forth. And I tend to, really for dramatic purposes, take science and then atheism and Enlightenment, the secular world, and kind of shit on it, to have a moment when I can introduce something from the old, like leeches, as actually having a reason to be. This is why leeches on your sores make sense, even though that's like a common trope that we make fun of dumb people from the past. I wonder.
Yeah, you're talking about maggots in your Civil War gut wound.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And everyone's like, they were so idiotic. And I'd like to suddenly say, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so crazy. It was actually had its own place, its own sense. And that was my grandson, I think. And it has a reason to be when you see the whole integrated human as something more than just a science being. So my question is how do we filter this out right now, because I love your writing really takes on this age of technology. Is there, how do we get back to sort of the simple lessons, proverbial
Mm.
things that, used to make sense? Now they're sort of made fun as old fashioned. Is there a
I
way?
think, yeah, there is. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot. And, you said you kind of, in a way, when it comes to atheism or secularism, there's an instinct to denigrate it just as being so short sighted or modern
Hmm.
or foolish. I think in some ways, when we talk about this, when we talk about like kids or this younger generation that's just lost, in some ways, our disgust or denigration or negative judgment, I think, is a cover for our shame. I think we have allowed the world to fall in so many ways. I mean, if you think about just pornography with boys, which is a scourge, right? It's a scourge that literally, like, boys don't even know how to interact or be intimate
I
with
know.
girls anymore.
I know.
Can you imagine when we were growing up, if somebody said, listen, John's going to go to school, there's going to be porn in his desk, there's porn in his locker, it's in the bathroom, it's on the walk home, it's everywhere all the time with him whenever he wants it, and we're just helpless to do anything about it. We can't possibly control it. How could we do that? There's thing after thing after thing where I feel like the institutions that we're all part of have abdicated their responsibility. And so one of the things that's been very hard for me, because I can, I have a strong work ethic. I don't like, it's easy for me to get denigrating about laziness or softness. It's much harder to look with empathy about, there's a lot of younger people in the younger generation who are actually that sensitive. They're not just snowflakes faking it like we see. And we have seen that. And there's plenty of people, dark triad personality type, which is narcissism, sadism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, who are messing around at the edges. We know who they are. There's a lot of people who are just lost. They're just lost.
Yes. Thank you for that.
And
Yeah.
in some ways, the lost, if we look at that with the responsibility to try and reach, and that involves trying to speak different languages and trying to be open and to try and carry meaning to them, I think it works a lot better than the sort of anger and outrage, which in a lot of ways comes more naturally in our frustration.
Yeah. We talk about sometimes on the show that um, a proper understanding of Christianity is as a hospital. And so when you see someone flailing about, it's not for you to identify necessarily the flailing. It's for you to see that they're suffering. And if you're able to see such a thing, most people will just stop flailing in front of me, bro. I remember riding. I'm from New York, and riding the subway around. You get a lot of characters, and the first thing you're always trying to figure out is this character gonna cause me a problem? Like a proper disposition might be, is what does this person need from me in order to become something like more fully human? What a hard thing to do. And I think that's the way I've started. I taught for a long time. I see students as that now. I struggled in the classroom though. I wanted them to be like, get it together, stop being such a snowflake. But I start to see now that this generation has a possibility to do something really profound. And that is to actually wake up to the reality of a broken America right now, and
Yeah.
maybe be salvific in some way as a generation.
Hmm.
Maybe it could happen. It's a lot of forces working against it. You talk about them as a writer often. I mean, the whole idea of nowhere man, how relevant is that right now about people not knowing their purpose? I see it all the time. I see a lot of people that come and join our organization. You know what they actually say in the interview? I think you'll appreciate this. Probably 70% of the people who want to come to First Things, you know what they say? I realize something's wrong, and I feel like if I'm dropped down in the middle, I mean, our guys live in mud huts and stuff. If I'm dropped there, everything will be exposed, and I won't be able to hide anymore. Like, that's a cry. That's a cry out.
Yeah. That's
And
powerful.
it is. Now, they don't always make the best field workers, because when they're out there, you can learn about yourself. That's fine. But it's hot and you're getting malaria and all of those accompanying asceticisms. they're not as fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you got to have sort of a military mission mentality to stick
Well,
through
if
some
you
of this
stay
stuff.
here, it's like, one of the things I've thought for a long time now is that luxury is just going to be the death of us. I mean, everything's
Mm,
so easy.
mm.
It's like, oh, I want to collect stamps. I go on eBay and click 2 buttons. It's like, there, I have a world-class stamp collection, right?
That's so
What
well
next?
said. Yes,
Right?
that's right.
I need to go shop. I need to find a rare book. I used to drive around to try and find, I did my undergrad work on Jung. That's when I first met Jordan, who's my thesis advisor. I remember driving around looking for
That's right.
Ion in bookstores. It's like, go online, click, there it is. Then I have more than I can read. It's like the obstacles are lowered. And C.S. Lewis says something great, in Screw Tape Letters when, he's giving advice to his nephew, who's a demon trying to corrupt the man on earth. He has 2 lines that just stuck with me really well. The first thing he says, so his nephew demon, who's kind of trying to corrupt this guy on earth, this guy's living with his older mom. And I think C.S. Lewis is a brilliant psychologist. It's part of what really helped connect me more deeply to understanding Christianity. Jung was my kind of path down from psychology, intellectualism to the spiritual. And then C.S. Lewis as a master psychologist kind of met there, and then I could follow him up a little bit. But he says, look, this guy who's living in a home with his older mom, he said, have him always concerned with the lofty ideal of the salvation of her soul and never with the state of her arthritis, right? Like, keep holier than thou. Like, don't get in the dirt,
That's right. That's right.
Which is so great.
I think that's what the meek are. The meek say, "Oh, I lost my foot. The donkey cart just ran it over, but it may be for my salvation."
Yeah.
I feel like when Christ is talking about the
Yeah.
meek, that's who he's talking about.
And he's got another. Oh, to your previous point, he's got this other line where he says that the ultimate aim of the devil, of course, who's the great glorious one in Screw Tape Letters, is to have us spend more and more time on vices that give us less and less pleasure. And that's great because, C.S. Lewis is like, look, if you're going to drink and have a good time once in a while, drink and have a good time once in a while, right? If you have, sensuality in an appropriate place in your marriage, go have it.
That's right.
But if you think about pornography, if you think about addiction, if you think about alcohol, if you think about, sitting on our bed, clicking through Apple TV with $1 trillion of free content and nothing seems special anymore. It's like, we're gorging. It's like, the what is it, like the pheasant is still stuck in our teeth from the last feast as we're dying. It's just,
wow, that's brilliant. Yeah, my very first priest that I ever had used to say, this is when I was courting, I was still single, and he would say, make sure when you're looking for a wife, he would tell all the guys, yeah, okay, does she believe, is she pious, does she fast? He goes, but pay attention carefully to how she feasts. How does one feast? Like, how does one actually come to enjoy the party? And if you see a proper feaster, you probably have a proper faster. In other words, to understand the low trough properly, you probably will do well at the high trough, at the high
peaks. Everything in its place. I mean, that's our recurrent leitmotif of this interview.
I know. I think you're right. We do keep coming back to that. Here's a question, and I want to ask you this, and then will you take a little test of ours that we do? Can I tell you about it for 2 seconds?
Sure.
It's a 5-question little test that I'll give you if you'll take it, and it just sort of says, are you an old world thinker or a new world thinker? I gave this to Pajot and all those cats at Symbolic World, so it's kind of fun. Maybe we'll finish with that.
All right.
Is that cool? But I want to ask you this. So I feel like your novels have this undergirding of some deep, profound psychology, and I think you would agree with that. And the protagonist, there's something like a moment where I feel like it's almost like Peterson always talks about, like, go make your bed. The habits will create the reality. Do you think the habits we develop can actually reshape reality? Like, we can have a bearing on what is real in the world by creating different habits?
I do, absolutely. I think we can even change the past with them.
Oh, explain that. That's interesting.
Well, let's say you have an altercation based on one of your flaws with your kid.
Mm-hmm.
And, let's say you drink too much or you have a temper, or I mean, fill in the blank, right? There's plenty of ways that people have friction in relationships. Well, if you keep doing it and disappointing them and they articulate it, and you do it and you disappoint them and they articulate it, the story by the time they're, you're dead and gone, if you've never made headway or worked on it, is, oh, my dad drank too much. My dad had a temper. My dad never spent time with me.
Mm.
But if you're aware and you're working towards connection with your kid, with someone who you love, and the conversation becomes quite different of like, wow, I can't believe I like lost my cool again. I'm really sorry. I'm so glad you spoke up, right? If you can move towards into that and then heal that, especially let's say if it's a father to a daughter who's, looking to date whoever she's going to date or have a template with, or let's say it's a son that you're too hard on. If you can move through your own flaws and your own shortcomings and see them and illuminate them in your love for another human and you're wanting to change for them, then the story becomes very different, which is, gosh, I had a dad who was flawed like every other human on the planet and cared so much about me that moved towards me. And in walking me through that, I could also figure out my communication when I feel uncomfortable around other people, whether it's friends or, potential spouse or whoever I date. And so then we can kind of alter the past by shaping how
Yes.
we're moving in the future. And it's a beautiful opportunity.
How do you think you? Okay, so that's a theme you keep turning to in this talk. How did you acquire this worldview that involves deep humility? You seem to have a humility quotient, but you're this big time writer. First of all, how do you battle against not becoming the opposite of humble? But where did you get this from?
I
It's
think I had
also
a pretty good run of not being humble, John. I think I had a pretty good case study. I mean, look, when I was younger, like I only wish I knew as much about everything in the world as like my senior year of high school through my junior year of college. Like I knew everything if you met me. There was nothing more for me to figure out. I had every answer to everything. Um, and then I think part of it is, look, part of this is I've had a lot of interventions in the political and cultural world, let's just say. In my heart, I'm a novelist. I think that's my first identity. And when you're a novelist, when you're writing characters, like what I'm trying to do is pull on their face mask and see the world through their eye holes.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
that's right.
occupy them in full. And the more that I do that, and I'm driven to that, I'm deeply curious. Before I did political excavations, I mean, had deep conversations all the way around the political wheel and all sorts of different stuff. But I've interviewed killers, I've interviewed outlaw bikers, I've interviewed porn stars, professors. Like if you go down the list, and I want to understand them so well that it's the opposite of straw man, or it's even different from steel man. I want to be able to articulate them and their worldview and meaning making even better maybe than they can. And once that's an aim, it's not just like, oh, here I am, I've learned something, and by articulated better than them, I don't mean occupy or embody it better than them. I mean in a book format where I can make an argument that is compelling because my understanding it and trying to connect readers to it. I do that with like hacking or, some of the guns in the series. It's a thriller series. I talk to people who are way smarter than I am in a field, but my inner engagement with them helps me connect more people to it, let's say.
That's right.
So when you do that enough, part of it is it's hammering yourself out of shape, and then you try and get back in shape, but you accommodate and assimilate new information. And doing that enough times, I'm just aware, like there's so much that I don't know that other people know. And I love being out over my skis. And so like when we did this Exodus seminar with the Daily Wire, I mean, everybody there I was an expert in storytelling in a lot of regards. I think there's other things that I think I can speak and keep up and process. Okay. There's a lot of psychology. There's a lot of things where I wasn't, cowering to go into it, but I'm really with world-class experts in a topic where I'm out over my skis on, and that's my favorite place to be. And, one of the lines Jordan says a lot is the fool precedes the master. And it's like, once I've done enough of it, I'm just okay being a fool. Like I'll come on and talk to you. I mean, you and Pajot know more about, you know, orthodoxy and your pinky fingernail than I've been exposed to, but it's captivating for me, and I love to hear about it. And so I think it's, you know, that's part of what it is. I don't like teeing up and becoming a bigger and bigger fish in a smaller pond. I like being thrown into other situations that I have to catch up from people who are much wiser than I am in particular arenas.
Maybe
So,
that's the writer's, maybe you're describing exactly the writer's job, which is to be the glue between the expert and the inquirer, because the reader is an inquirer. I mean, I look, I want to go. You're going to make a movie, right? I think there's a movie deal for some of your books coming out. Is that right?
Yeah, a couple of them. I'm just steering Orphan X in, and you know, I've had a couple other movies made. I mean, I've played in that space some.
So there's an inquiry. So I'm going to go watch a movie. I'm just talking about me, or go read a book. In part because I'm inquiring about that world that the writer has created, and it would, you couldn't be a writer if you actually were the expert. In some ways, if you think about it, even if you are the expert on whatever you're writing about, you still are translating in a way that an expert doesn't have to. I think about engineers. We hire a lot of engineers. They're terrible at translating, which is, I think, what the writer is good at. They're really good at,
well, it's mediation, it's negotiation, and more, right. I don't write, since the very beginning of my career, I don't write heroes and villains. I write antagonists and protagonists. I want the antagonist to be like whispering darkly in your ear, where you're like 49% convinced they might be right. I want my protagonist to stumble.
I love that.
Right. So I want to kind of build these things out. And so, I mean, there is a big part of trying to connect. And along the way, you know, I hope I can learn enough that I can be fluent in a lot of different sets of language, but it is part of what I love. It's part of what I love doing.
Well, it's good stuff. I want to place you in our world with this little quiz. If I could.
All right,
I feel like there's more to say, but I'm going to try to keep it under an hour, because I don't know about you these days. I could keep talking, but maybe we can meet again. And well, just real quick, what's coming up next for you before I put you in this quiz? Because I think you'll like this. It's going to start a whole new conversation. What's coming up? So Lone Wolf is out right now, or it's not out?
Lone Wolf came out last month. That's the 9th in the Orphan X series. I really dive into a lot of the stuff we're talking about with technology and where the future goes. It's through the prism of a very personal thriller story. In some ways, it's my most personal book, but also deals with the furthest reaching issues we're contending with. So that's coming out. I have a couple, film TV projects that are shaping up. That's always development. It's never really worth talking about till something's, I'm standing on set and it's day 2 of production. I have a comic that came out a while ago called New Think that is sort of like my Black Mirror meets the Twilight Zone. Pajot and I did a discussion with that on his podcast.
Oh yeah, he loved it.
That was a lot of fun. And we have the sequel to Exodus coming out that was the big project on the Daily Wire. And that'll be announced soon. That's also going to be out on the Daily Wire. I'm working on that, and I'm still continuing to do a lot of work on anti-polarization in the culture. I've shifted more from political engagement. I did a lot of work initially trying to wrangle and pull the Democrats back from the far left. And increasingly, I'm interested in interventions direct to the culture. I don't think we're going to elect a new slate of politicians who are going to save the day. I think we need to invigorate and nourish people in the culture and move the culture so that everybody, politicians included, are looking to a direction of meaning that everyone can kind of tack towards.
Beautiful. So, I have a whole set of questions. That's what we'll do next time. But because I think you just nailed it, the body will give birth to the politicians that we actually need, but the body's not able right now. We're not. I love it. We're working on anti-polarization, which makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And I think these conversations in this part of the internet are part of that. I think they are.
I agree with you.
Let's figure out if you're old world or new world. This will take about 5 minutes. So the old world is that age before the Enlightenment. And the reason I know a lot about this is I feel like my work has like placed me in those cultures. I lived in Mali where this was like 12th century life, and I loved it. It was hard, but I loved it. So sometimes people don't know how they think. So I think we've invented, and I'm joking here, a perfect MIT tested scientific examination that will place you in a certain spot. So here we go. Here's your test. I'm going to write down your scores. People who like our podcast always want to find out, like, what do you think that guy was? So here we go. Gregg. 5 questions. You answer 3 is strongly agree, like full on. 0 is strongly disagree. 2 is mostly agree. 1 is mostly disagree. Got it? Makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Here's the question. When you die, you won't really die all the way. It's more like you'll be asleep or something, waiting for some sort of next world. 3, strongly agree. 2,
3.
Oh, there it is. There's a 3. Look at that. You came in strong on that, Gregg. Very strong. Here's your next question. The best way for you to know yourself is to ask someone else about yourself. The best way to know yourself is to ask someone else about yourself.
I'm neutral because it depends on who you ask. So you tell me what, man. Yeah, I think there's a place for reflection and there's a place for input socially. So
got it. Now remember, we've studied this exam and it's perfect.
Okay,
so
I understand.
It's not an exam problem. It's probably a you problem,
That's
Gregg. I'm just trying to have fun with it.
I'll add it to the list.
All right, number 3. So when you carry a picture around, let's say, of someone that you love, there's a picture, it's in your wallet or wherever it is, it's in your pocket. You're actually carrying that person around with you, like they're there, actually close to you in some way.
Strongly agree.
Oh, really? Interesting. That's where a lot of people get, they kind of come back. Let's see. Here's another one. Question 4, 2 more. Respect isn't earned. Respect is owed by you to others. Respect isn't earned. It's owed by you to others.
These are so tricky, man. It's tricky because
first of all, we love you because you're actually, look guys, his brain is like, it's smoking. I love it.
I think it's owed. I think it's owed until it's proven otherwise. And if it's proven otherwise, then it needs to be earned.
So something like a 2? Mostly agree? Mostly agree. Last question. Trying not to give anything away because this will change your life forever. I told Jordan that this is pretty. Psychology's over when we fixed it. You don't have to have psychology anymore. Here's your 5th question. I hope and expect to take my parents in. So it's a mirror type question. So I hope and expect to take my parents in and have them live with me when they get old and infirm, or flip it around. I fully expect to live near my kids, even preferably in their home when I get old and infirmed.
Strong agree.
3. All right. So here's your totals. 6, 9, 10, 11, 12 and a half. So I'm going to tell you what this means. Are you ready?
Does it mean I'm never going to get invited back on this podcast?
No, not at all.
All right.
I love it though. So if you scored, which we did have someone score this recently on this show, I can't even explain who he is. He's a very interesting character. Malcolm is his name. I'm forgetting his last name. Anyway, guys who watch this, they know he scored a 0. This is if you scored a 0, which you did not, you'd be the Francis Bacon Award, which is old world thinking, has the same appeal to you as placing leeches on an open sore. You're such a light person. You're so enlightened in the scientific way that you enjoy concocting new ways to study the effects that scientific studies have on science students. So that's not you. You're not a high nooner. That would be 2 to 4. That's something like everywhere you go, science just follows you around like a halo.
High nooner.
It's a high nooner. You're not the shining city dweller on the hill. That's someone that really trusts the modern world. Like they go to Reddit to figure out the right answers. It's people who would do what science told them to do. If everyone did that, then the world would be better off. You think Columbus was a jerk, but also you weirdly appreciate the New World philosophies he held. So you're not a suburbanite either. Check this out. You are a villager. Now again, this will change your life. So I'm just glad you came here for this because I feel better. It's what we can offer on this show. There's a good chance, Greg, that you hate malls. Places like Algeria and Ethiopia roll out the red carpet for you. Your Spotify collection includes chants from hard to pronounce provinces. And you wish there was a little more hierarchy in the world. This is you. I feel good about offering this service to people when they come on the show.
I think you nailed. I think that I no longer need to wrestle with God. I feel like it's complete. My journey, it's done. I'm enlightened. It's over.
Do you feel better? A lot of people are like, what'll happen is you'll start calling me a lot just to talk more about this test, and I'll help you get through life. Your marriage is everything gets better from here on out.
I'll take it.
I thank you for doing it. What happens is when some of our guests come on, we joke about it, my team and I, but they generally the numbers tend to fit sort of the psychology of the people. So, all right, here's what I hope you'll do. I hope you'll check out what we're doing, but mostly I hope you'll come back because these podcasts really help us. And there's something else that goes on is I'm able to figure out our place in the world. And people like you are bending culture with your books and your art, and it helps me to understand where our little organization needs to go. I really appreciate it. It's very kind.
Well, it's really been, it's good talking to you. I really enjoy it.
Come to our restaurant. Our nonprofit opened a restaurant called KP Restaurant. It's a Georgian restaurant where we do it's called the Georgian Supra. It's a special dinner with a tamada, a Toastmaster. I don't know if you've ever been to the Georgian Republic.
No, where is it?
It's in Greenville, South Carolina.
Man, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's a 16 toast. The tamada leads you through these traditions. We do it with the community on Friday nights, meaning if you and your wife came, you would sit with 20 people you don't know. And we all sit together and do these toasts. I did them in Georgia and learned how to do it. And we have events during the year. We have 2 of them called the Art of Tamada, where we bring people for a weekend. We teach this unique dinner and share times together. Pajot came last year. Well, he was on his way there. He had a little side emergency, but he was one of the folks we had, Neil deGrade, and we all got together and we do it every year. I highly recommend that too. So
it sounds amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And we'll look for your work. And thanks for being, I don't know. Thanks for being accessible in the deep ideas. It's really nice to talk to you.
Likewise. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Guys, www.first-things.org. We do something called Create Momentum for the Extreme Poor. We do it in Africa, East and West, the Caucasus. We do it in Guatemala. We just put a new guy there named Matt. He's like 7 feet, 11 inches tall. Well, he'll feel that tall to the Guatemalans in Momosanango, who he's going to work with, because he's actually 6'7". He said 6'6". I think he's 6'7". He's my friend. He works for us now. He's in the field. More to go, more to come. I hope all of you can support us. Just do $20 a month. Okay. Or $5 a month. Okay. Or $200 a month. Or help us train Adrian, who's coming in to work as their executive field director because Daniel Paternos is leaving, but he's staying with First Things in a special capacity. Adrian's coming in. We got to train him. I got to take him to site. It's stuff costs money, and I hate it. Guys, we love you. Goodbye. Wasn't that a nice talk, though? I loved it. And hopefully Gregg will come back and eat dinner with us. I think he is. In fact, we talked even after, and it's cool. Love you. Peace out. Great to have you here. Gagi Marjos, and isn't it a lovely spring? Pascha has paskid. Christe agsta. Christos voskres. Christe aneste. Christos anesti. It is good to be alive. Mwah. See you soon.